Let me begin, if I may, speaking as a judge and human rights lawyer, to explain why the members of Camp Ashraf deserve protection. There's a long history to this, and it wasn't till 1986 that the French, under the pressure of Iran, wrongly, in my view, and in the view of international law, expelled them. The French wanted to curry favor with Iran, and so they expelled them, and they were taken in to Iraq, and they built Camp Ashraf. And of course, in 1988, when the Iraq-Iran war ended, with the Ayatollah drinking his cup of poison, he said, to sign the truce, he had a vicious idea in mind. He issued a secret fatwa that the Mujahideen prisoners would all be executed. And executed all they were. Death committees of judges, Islamic judges, went into the prisons in Iran. They asked only one question of these political prisoners: are you still a Mujahideen supporter? Those who said yes were taken out and hanged. They were hanged from cranes, 6 at a time. They were hung in prison auditoriums, 10 at a time. This was the most barbaric episode since the Second World War, because the treatment of prisoners, the most vulnerable people in your country, and it was hushed up. The United Nations turned a blind eye to it. They had a hopeless rapporteur who was meant to look at the matter and didn't. And so that terrible crime against the Mujahideen, against those struggling against the Khomeini regime, was hidden. And so we have that as the background, as it were, the progenitors, the precursors of those who were left in Camp Ashraf. They have built up Camp Ashraf, millions of pounds worth of structures, this land that was given to them legitimately. They have got libraries, they have buildings, and all worth a good deal of money. So with that as background, let's look at what has happened to the Camp Ashraf people over the last few years. They were protected under the Geneva Conventions when, in 2003, this country, I'll come back to it, but this country, along with the United States, launched an invasion of Iraq. They were protected because they are refugees. They couldn't be sent back to Iran because Iran would kill them. This is the hatred that was manifested in 1988 when the Mujahideen were strung up. They would be killed as Moharib, enemies of God, which is the passing of the death sentence in Iran. They were recognized by the United States formally in 2003 as protected persons under the Geneva Conventions. They built their roads, their residential structures, their educational, social, and sports facilities in the camp. And on the 7th of October 2005, the deputy commander of the US coalition forces, that's us, that's Britain as well as the United States, complimented the residents on, I quote, working together in the spirit of common humanitarianism. And he confirmed the coalition, that's us as well as America, right to be protected from violence and their right as refugees not to be what we lawyers call refouled, that is, to be sent to a country that would persecute them, be sent back to Iran. Now, it all seemed fine until the Americans got scared and decided to pull out their troops from Iraq, and that began in 2008. And that was the first time the Iraqi government, the light bulb shone. They realized, no doubt encouraged by Iran, that they would get Camp Ashraf because they told the Americans the PMOI was a terrorist organization. That was when General Petraeus said, no, they're protected persons, and we'll defend them. But al-Maliki said, and I quote, "I am determined to put an end to the PMOI." And as soon as the US combat forces had left, he ordered the wicked attack on the camp in 2009. In July 2009, the American army watched, because by then their combat forces were out. They were merely observers as the Iraqis, under the Prime Minister's order, attacked the camp. It killed 11 residents, 6 were shot, 5 beaten to death. Hundreds were wounded. And this was apparently, I suspect, an attempt to terrorize the residents into leaving voluntarily. But of course, it steeled their purpose to remain. And so al-Maliki ever since has continued a siege of Camp Ashraf, denying food and medicine. In 2011, the Iranians stepped up their demands to get rid of the camp and the people. When the last US observation post at Camp Grizzly was left, al-Maliki ordered another murderous assault. And in April of last year, 35 were left dead and hundreds injured with gunshot and shrapnel wounds. Of course, there was an international outcry. The Commissioner for Human Rights deplored the killings, demanded that al-Maliki set up an inquiry, which, of course, he promised to do, but he's a liar and never did. So the White House said, oh, we're deeply troubled by these casualties, but not troubled enough to do anything positive. And now the deadline, at least the support of people like yourselves and the international community has forced the Iraqis to move back until April, their deadline for destroying the camp without compensation. And I must say, the first point I make as a lawyer is that this is unlawful. You cannot deny people, you can expropriate people's property. The treatment, the continuing vulnerability of the people of Camp Ashraf as they get transferred to this unsewered, broken down concentration camp called Camp Liberty. That is one of the serious situations that we face today. The United Nations itself has adopted what is called the Responsibility to Protect, R2P, principle that it will step in and stop a government that is committing crimes against humanity against people within its sovereign area. Well, crimes against humanity involve widespread and systematic acts of killing, persecution, and other inhumane acts. And what has been going on to the residents of Camp Ashraf at the responsibility of the Iraqi government ever since the American combat forces left, since the killings began in 2009, but an ongoing crime against humanity. There were killings in 2009, killings in 2011, constant inhumane acts, which have now dwindled, but nonetheless are still clearly persecutory. You can only read the experiences of going into Camp Liberty and understand that what is happening to the residents is a constant persecution, humiliation. That is they are met at Camp Liberty by the very Iraqi general who ordered the shootings in 2009 and 2011. They're subject to a barrage of insults, many of them, incidentally, being Iranian-style insults. They're being called hypocrites, that peculiar word that the Ayatollah Khomeini back in 1981 invented for them, hypocrites. And so they're being this word that tightened the noose about the necks of those courageous young mujahideen. Kalk in 1988 is being thrown at the residents of Camp Ashraf as they enter concentration camp Liberty. This is unsatisfactory. The United Nations has a duty. It seems to me that it is a duty that is not being properly carried out, either by the UN force there and Ambassador Kobler, who seems to have caved in to Iraqi demands far more readily than he should, and seems particularly open to criticism for his failure to consult the representatives of Camp Ashraf. I think that is a serious failure, and I think there must be an answer to the question, who inspected Camp Liberty? It was obviously unfit for purpose. It was obviously it was obviously an inhumane place to coop people up. And there must be, if he was responsible for that, and for then telling the people of Camp Ashraf, you're going to this place that's has the UN stamp of approval, it's been certified, there must be an inquiry. I think the UN refugee agency, I hate criticizing them because they have such a difficult job to do, but I think in this case they've made, and Professor Godwin Gill thinks so as well, and he's the world expert on refugee law, I think they've got the law wrong. These people are obviously refugees, 3,400 of them, because if they go back to Iran, they'll be executed and persecuted. We all know that. Everyone knows that. So why aren't they being certified in that way? I mean, these people should all have been interviewed in Camp Ashraf over the last few months in preparation for and given refugee status. It seems that the UN refugee agency, has given them special treatment, and especially unprejudiced treatment. So I think there is criticism there. The refugee agency has deliberately stalled and put at risk their lives by refusing to give them their refugee status interview in Camp Ashraf. But I come back to this. It's the Obama administration that's given a free kick to the enemies of Camp Ashraf by the failure to lift the designation of terrorist on its people. Now, this designation was subject to court challenge in Britain, and the High Court described it as perverse. That was the language of the English courts. It is perverse to say that Camp Ashraf people are terrorists. In Europe, again, the designation was lifted. Now, 18 months ago, a US court ordered the State Department, ordered Hillary Clinton to reconsider, because the designation had been made without what the Americans call due process. And it's the failure, even today, they've had 18 months to review the designation, and they haven't. And it gives a free kick to the Iranians who say, they're terrorists, get them out. Camp Ashraf is 80 miles from the border. We don't want terrorists on our doorstep. It gives a free kick to al-Maliki, who says, of course we can put these people in a prison, they're terrorists. And it's all the fault of the US State Department, which for some extraordinary reason that no one can really understand, has not lifted that designation. It is a bogus excuse to deny the people of Ashraf their rights. And I have to say that the greatest objection to Iran developing nuclear power is the fact that it's already granted itself impunity for mass murder, and it may mass murder again. The residents of Camp Ashraf deserve protection.